Hello everyone and welcome to Power Hour. I'm Laura Rogers and this is Joelle. Say hi.
Hello.
And we've been doing Power Hour for over 8 years. This is our show all about Microsoft 365, SharePoint, PowerApps, Power Automate, Teams, all the things that you can do being a business user, not too technical in Microsoft 365. So we've evolved over the years. It all used to be just SharePoint Power Hour. Now it's kind of all these things. Same audience though. Same general concept of who the audience is. And so I send out a newsletter the day before Power Hour every time we have Power Hour. And I let you all vote, pick some between a few topics. So this time you all voted for the topic of moving from InfoPath to PowerApps. So, and it was an overwhelming amount of votes. It had something like 80 votes more than whatever the next one was. So it was a lot. This is, it kind of makes me sad that you all are, a lot of you or so many of you are still stuck on InfoPath because Microsoft announced in 2016 that there were to only be 10 more years. So I think it's still, the deadline is still 2026 where InfoPath is going away. So they gave you 10 years. And it did take them a while once they announced that InfoPath was going away to come up with what you're supposed to be moving to when they came out with PowerApps. So there was like a gap of a couple of years where there wasn't really anything to move to. So InfoPath is very old. Just a little background. If you are newer in Microsoft 365 and you don't even know what I'm talking about, I wrote a Microsoft Press book using Microsoft InfoPath with SharePoint 2010, long time ago. And me and Dervish Shadravan wrote that. And it was, that's how Joelle was talking in the pre-show about that's how we met, because she had read my book and came over to our user group meeting in Birmingham. And because we're doing a meeting about InfoPath, that's where we met the first time in 11 or so. And
I think it was 11.
Yeah. So I'm going to do an actual slideshow today on moving from InfoPath to PowerApps and all these concepts to understand and things to know about with the interface and getting around in there, and then also concepts and things that you can build in PowerApps. And there are so many things that you can do, just an overwhelming number of things that you can do with PowerApps that you couldn't do with InfoPath. That and it's a completely different product, and all these concepts are completely different. It's a completely different way of thinking about just so many of these things. So I highly recommend just learning PowerApps from scratch, as if and not try and just do this little piecemeal thing. But I'm going to highlight all the important things to know about getting familiar with the new interface. And we have a live chat. We always have during Power Hour. Wherever you're watching this video, there is a link to fill out the form to request to join. And we have to manually add you all. So because it's we're adding you as an external guest in Teams, so we'll be chatting in Teams. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and then I'll show you how to chat in Teams. So here's Teams, and so once you've been invited, you'll be in Teams, and you'll see your tenant up here, and you'll be able to switch. You'll see my tenant. It'll say IW Mentor Power Hour. You'll see it listed, and you'll be able to switch over to it the next time you want to join Power Hour. And then we have this team that you get added to called Power Hour, and you'll go to the general channel and go to the tab for whatever today's Power Hour is. We leave a few of them in here. And then it will look like this. And then you click this little conversation button, and that's where you can chat with us. So maybe, Joelle, could you do me a favor and see if people like request to join while we're having Power Hour, just in case there are any people that are just now filling it out for the first time. And we'll get y'all added. Okay, so there's our chat. Hi, everybody. And that's the fun thing about having Power Hour live, is that we can chat and have discussions the whole time, and it's very informal. So I will go ahead and move this over here so I can kind of see it. And I'm curious, this is such an interesting topic. I'm curious, what is the holdup? So if you have time, if you're in the chat and you're still using an InfoPath, I'm curious as to what the holdup is and why your company, I know it's not your fault. You're watching, you're an IT person and you have no control over what technologies your company has moved to or not moved to. So let me know. I'm curious as to what the reasoning is for your leadership, basically preventing you all from moving away from InfoPath. So just type that out in the chat and we'll kind of discuss those as we go. So here you can you see my screen, Joelle? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks. All right. So this is a general concept of what the two different products look like. We have InfoPath on the left, and I'm using the same concept here in both of these examples of an absence request form. Just kind of wanted to give you a visual. PowerApps is a completely blank canvas that you're starting with. So you can make a Power App look like anything you want to. So this just happens to be one that I created that was similar concept, that was an absence request form, because I wanted to show the concept of having like a sub list over there on the right on the form. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all these concepts in designing your InfoPath form compared to designing it in PowerApps. So the first thing that you had in InfoPath was when you were customizing a list form. Now, you probably heard me talk about the concept of there's customizing a list form with PowerApps, but there's also the concept of a standalone Canvas app. I usually use standalone Canvas apps. I usually, just if you're new here, I usually don't start from customizing a list form this way. But I wanted to show the similarities in the fact that with InfoPath, it came out in 2010, the ability to just directly customize a list form without having to do a form library. So you could go to the ribbon and click customize an InfoPath, and then in PowerApps, if you want to just quickly customize a list form, you can go to the integrate button in your list and then click PowerApps and choose customize forms. There's even a way to do it in a library too if you want to customize the form that's got the metadata for your files in the library. And then if you want to switch it back, they still have InfoPath in here in these settings. When you go to your list and go to form settings in the list settings screen, then if you've customized it in PowerApps or InfoPath, you can switch it back to use the default SharePoint form at any time. All right, so now we're going to talk about getting familiar with the interface when you're designing your PowerApps compared to InfoPath. We'll talk about the data, tree view, screens, galleries, forms, cards, and buttons and navigation. All right, so here we have, now this is very, very different. In InfoPath, when you had your tree view down the side, it was on the right side, it was a list of all the fields, and you would take your fields and you drag them onto the form. Well, in PowerApps, this is a completely different concept because, first of all, these are not fields that are listed in the tree view. There is no list of all your fields to drag onto the form. There is the list that you're going to see here in this tree view is all the controls. So every time you add a control, button, label, text box, anything like that, it's going to show up here in the tree view on the left. So when you add the control in PowerApps that you're going to use in order to have a form in your app is called the form control. And so once you plop the form control in there, it'll have the ability to pick which fields it shows, but it just doesn't have a concept of dragging fields onto the form from a list like InfoPath had. All right, so in InfoPath, we had the concept of views, and views were, we would use different views. The most common thing that I used views for in InfoPath was that I had a new view, and then I would always just create an approvals view so that people approving that form would have just a sort of a different interface with buttons to approve and reject and things like that. And then you can create a read-only view. So in PowerApps, you don't have views. They're not called views, they're called screens. But it's really the same concept. It's the ability to have different things that the user's navigating around in, to present different things, different buttons. You could have a screen that you call the welcome screen, and you could have it take you to different parts of the app, different screens. And then each, when you finish filling out a form, you could have it navigate you back to the welcome screen or somewhere else. So it's just different places you're navigating around in the app. So here are a few examples of screens. This is a common app that I use in demos, my Customers and Projects app. So it's just showing you an example of what I've got on several screens here. The concept with this app is that if you're a consultant, you have customers, you have multiple projects per customer, you have multiple timesheet entries per project. You can go in and click on the customer, click which project you need to enter your time for, and then go in and add, filling your timesheet basically, and add your what you spent time on. And these are all different screens you're navigating around in the app. Also, we have properties, and we have in InfoPath. So basically, when you click on a particular control, like a button or a text box or label, whatever it happens to be, in PowerApps, in InfoPath, you could double click on it and it would pull up this property panel. And you also had the ribbon at the top, which is a contextual ribbon. So it would show all the properties of whatever control you had just selected. So you kind of had two options where you could double click to open up the properties box, or you could just use a lot of those properties in the ribbon at the top. And then PowerApps, you have several different places that you can go to edit the properties of a given control. And it is also contextual. So you can click on something like say a button. In this example, I've clicked on a button, and you can see the properties in several different places. So you have, and again, it's whatever you've clicked on, whatever you've selected, that's the thing that you're looking at the properties about. So this property panel is over on the far right, and you can see that it's got sort of I would say like an easy mode, the little tab that says properties, and it's got a very sort of pretty interface with easy little toggles and color pickers and some settings. But you can also go to the advanced tab, and you can look at sort of a more raw way of looking at all those settings for that same control. And this is a place where you'll be able to enter in formulas and just be able to search for properties. You can just type, like if I want to look at all the properties for the way a button looks when it's disabled, I can just type disabled in the little search box, and that takes me to those properties. So it's just another way of getting around in that list of properties and finding the property that you want. Also, another place, a third place where you can edit properties of the currently selected thing is up at the top in this little drop down. So right now I've got the fill property selected, but that drop down, when you drop it down, shows a whole big long list of that same list of properties for that item. And different types of controls are going to have different types of properties. So for example, a button is going to have a hover color, and other things like a label is not going to have a hover color necessarily. So you'll have like different properties that you see depending on what type of control you've selected, just like in InfoPath where you had different properties for different types of controls. All right, you also have the concept of rules in InfoPath and PowerApps. They're not called rules. They actually, Microsoft had temporarily, or not temporarily, like for a while there was a little rules concept in PowerApps that was trying to kind of mimic the concept of rules in InfoPath, but it didn't. It was very clunky and it didn't really make much sense, so that they kind of phased that out. But we do have, so in InfoPath, when you wanted something to happen, when you click something, you would create rules on that button or whatever it was, and then the rules would happen in order down the screen. And so in this example in the screenshot, I wanted it to set the fields and then submit and close. So it would just go down and just do all those actions in a row. You had different actions that you could use, like submit, set fields. You could set do a formula. You could close the form. I don't even remember a lot of what the rules were, but they're off the top of my head. That's the way you did it, and it was in the panel that would show down the right side of the screen. It's so funny that this is all just so fuzzy to me now because it's been so many years since I've been working in InfoPath. So in PowerApps, you have a completely different concept. You still have the ability for it to do actions when you click something, but the way you do these in PowerApps is by using these functions, and they're like commands that you tell it. So there are some just really common ones that it's easy to remember. It's a little overwhelming when you first start using this formula bar, because you could literally just type anything, and you kind of get presented with, well, how do I know what the options are, and what do I type? It's the concept with these formulas. It's sort of like Excel formulas. And if you're an Excel user, you kind of get used to how an if statement works and how a concatenate works and how different, like a lookup and different things like that you have in Excel. But you also can search for formulas. And also, if you're using a formula in Excel, it will kind of give you hints and show you what different parts of the formula are supposed to be. So PowerApps will do that too. And when you're building these forms, it doesn't have to be that complicated and overwhelming. There's some very basic sort of actions that you're going to use, just that are going to be the ones that you use most of the time, like navigating, setting a variable, submitting a form. So with PowerApps, and you've probably seen me do this in all my Power Hours that I've done about PowerApps and in my PowerApps training courses, but the best practice when you have a button, so you can see in this screenshot that I've got a couple of buttons. When the best practice is that when you click on your button and you're typing a formula for the onSelect. Now, onSelect is a property that every single control has in a Power App. And onSelect means this is what I want to happen when I click this thing. So it could be a button, could be a label, could be a rectangle, could be anything, an icon, anything that you want something to happen when you click on it. You can just go to the property called onSelect. Now, onSelect is not the one that you see on the screen, but what I want to tell you is that for the button, when you want people to submit a form, you're going to use the submit form function. But the key, this is an important best practice, is don't put anything after submit form. So I mentioned that you put a semicolon between things that you want to happen in a row. When submitting a form, you don't want it to submit the form and move on, because it could potentially have validation errors. It could potentially have fields maybe that they didn't fill out or something like that. So what you want to do with a form in particular is with the submit button, you would have it do the submit form, and then you go to this property, and this is the one that I have on the screenshot here. I've selected the whole form control. It's called FRM time. And then I went to the property called onSuccess. So anything that you want to happen after the form is submitted, you want to put that in the onSuccess property. So I want it to navigate to another screen, to this screen called the screen project list, and then I want to set a variable. So I'm navigating, then I've got a semicolon, and then I'm setting a variable. And so if I wanted to do something after that, I would do a semicolon and reset the form, or do whatever other common things that I typically would do after submitting a form. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Oh,
I don't think so. Most people are just kind of sharing.
Do what?
Most people have just been sharing about like why they're using it or why they're not, and that kind of thing.
Okay. Let's see. Wow, that's a lot. Thank you all. Okay, I'm going to read through those kind of towards the end. That would be a good time to do that, I think. But I cannot wait to hear because I'm intrigued. I really am. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, and that's an important thing for you to understand when you're moving from InfoPath to PowerApps, is that important little sort of weirdness about when you're submitting a form. Don't put anything after the submit form action. Put it in the on success of the form control. Okay. Now, when you're dealing with data in InfoPath, you would have your data connection to the list that you were on, and then you could also add data connections to other lists in that same SharePoint site. And you could, if you were very fancy, there were other sort of things that you could do as well. Like you could, there's one called, it was your user profile, and you could connect to that sort of using a web service way so that you could get information about the current user's profile. If you were a dev, you could do sort of, there was a way to connect to other databases, which I don't think I ever did in InfoPath because it got really hairy and complex. And when you get to the point where you're trying to connect to databases, you wouldn't have wanted to been using an InfoPath form anyway. You would get a dev involved and do something more custom. So the data connections in InfoPath were very limited. In PowerApps, you can do all kinds of stuff. I've got a screenshot here. I'm using the Office 365 users data connection. That's the one that you would use to be able to get the user profile information, like the person's manager. I've got one that I'm connecting to a flow where I'm kicking off a flow at a certain point. I've got even a fun one where I can write a tweet and have it go out to Twitter directly from my app. Then I've got several different data connections for several different SharePoint lists. So I've got each SharePoint list that you connect to is just going to be listed here. So the cool thing about PowerApps compared to InfoPath, one of the cool things is that you can connect to any SharePoint list anywhere in SharePoint. You're not stuck with just the ones on the site that you're in. So it can be lists from any site. So if you have some concept, like some central location where you have a list of customers, or you have a list of products that you sell, or divisions and departments in your company, you could easily just have those live in a central location and have multiple different Power Apps all referencing that same information from wherever they happen to be. So this is really powerful, the ability to have data connections from just anything in SharePoint. All right, so here, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, the form control. Here's what the form control looks like. When you go to the Insert tab at the top, you choose Form Control, and this is what it looks like. So the first thing it's going to do is, most of the time it will just by default add just all the fields that exist in your list, and it will just throw them all on there for you. But you can go through here and just use the delete key and delete the ones that you don't want. And there's also this fields little panel that pops out that lets you add them back, and you can change some settings in them too. So you can click add field, and you'll be presented with all the fields in that list, and then you can add them. So when you add them to this screen, each field is called a card. So you can see they're kind of like little sort of chunks on here, like the work date, the hours, description, project. Each of those is what's called a card. And so cards are what you're dealing with when you're in a form control. And I did a whole power hour about logic on the cards, and I did logic, I think just a couple of power hours ago, I did something with logic. It was dealing with cards and hiding and showing things. Anyway, I've got a lot of different power hours that I've done about Power Apps form logic, and the way that you can make it kind of look a certain way, maybe according to a certain control, like a value that you've selected in a drop down, and make it hide and show things. So the cards are what you're going to be dealing with. And then again, just like with everything in Power Apps, they all have a lot of different properties. So one of the properties that exists for a card is, well, every single control has a visible property. So everything has visible. And visible is by default, it's true. And visible is just a Boolean. It can be true or false. So that's where you're telling it whether you want something to be showing or not. So you can do this on your individual cards. You can do logic to say, say if I select that the project is a high priority from a dropdown, then I want this certain other field to show. And if it's not high priority, I don't want that field to be on the form. So that kind of concept. If they select other, I want them to fill out this other box that has a description of what the other thing is, or any kind of logic like that. So that's what you're working with in the form control. All right, so then you have all these controls that you can add to your form, to your app. So in InfoPath, this is what your list of controls look like. And you had a text box and combo box, rich text, check boxes, date and time, just all kinds of different things. You have a lot of the similar ones in PowerApps. Some of the concepts are going to be different when it comes to like calculated values and repeating sections, repeating tables, things like that are going to be slightly different. But a lot of the most common ones, like the ones at the top, they also exist in PowerApps. So in PowerApps, you're going to go to the Insert tab at the top, and you can see we've got kind of all these things that I've got popping out here. Oops, let me go back. Got my... I was trying to make it do the animation again. There. Okay. Yeah, so I've got text, input, gallery is a list of things, data table is a list of things. The forms drop down is where you're going to be able to insert a form control. And then media has things like images and video. And there are a lot of things in here that you didn't have in InfoPath. So that's going to be where that concept will relate to the concept of inserting things in PowerApps. All right, now this is a huge one, the concept of sublists, repeating tables. There was a big issue in InfoPath when you needed to have a repeating table. And a repeating table is any sort of child list of items. So like if you're going on if you have an expense report that you're filling out, you're going to have expense sort of line items for that expense report. If you've got an absence request form, you'll have the main, the absence request form itself, and then you have to have this sort of sub list of all the days that you're going to be requesting to be absent, and that could be a number of days, and it could vary. So that's the concept. And so in InfoPath, with a form library form, that's the old school forms that first came out in 2000, I think SharePoint 2003 had them. Was it InfoPath 2003 or was it, I know it came, maybe it was 2007. I think maybe InfoPath was 2007. So long ago. I started using SharePoint in 2003, but I'm pretty sure InfoPath was new in 2007. Anyway, all we had was a form library form. So when you submitted an InfoPath form, it was just going into a library as a file. It was an XML file. But then 2010 was where they finally allowed the concept of customizing a list form. So with a form library form, though, you could put these repeating tables in it, and it was just a control that you would put in there and tell it which fields you wanted to have. The problem with having it in that form library form was it was a great user interface. It made it easy for users to enter the data just inside of that form, but it was a huge pain to try and do anything with the data to get it out. You couldn't have it be in a separate list, and there was a lot. I wrote several different blog posts and did videos back then on sort of like these very hacky workarounds of trying to create a form library form and get the data out of the repeating tables and have it be in a separate list so that you could do something with the data, or try and have a form. I wrote a post that a lot of people tried to do this too, of having multiple web parts on a web part page, where one was like the parent form and another one was a separate SharePoint list as like the child form. And so having them in web parts kind of made it look like one big form. It was very clunky and awkward though. Anyway, none of those problems exist with PowerApps. With PowerApps, you have your parent form is a SharePoint list or a table, some sort of table. Your child forms can all just be also SharePoint lists or tables in a database. And then since PowerApps is just a completely blank canvas, you can do whatever you want to with it. You can insert this gallery on a screen in your Power App, and you can just have this repeating table concept and just put whatever fields you want to have in there. You can put another form control on there to be this little sub form. And so that's what this screenshot is, with the gallery sort of the top and then the form control at the bottom for people to be able to enter new rows. If you want it to be it's a little clunky the way it's they got these really big boxes for the absence type, hours, and start. So you can go into the form control and like kind of mess with the font sizes and stuff, but you could also just use patching. If you're more advanced, you'll know what I'm talking about with just being able to not use a form control and just put a couple of fields down there and just patch to that child list. And so that's just another option that you have. I teach all those details in my advanced PowerApps course at our company, IW Mentor. So you also have conditional formatting, which was a huge, big common thing that we did in InfoPath. And what you did was you would click on whatever the control was that you wanted to create the rules, and you'd have the panel that would fly out to the side where you could create your formatting rules. And then that's where you could say, if some condition, then hide this control, or if some condition, then you can make it look like a certain color, or you can even do things like disable it, like disable a button. So, and you could create multiple formatting rules on any given control. So with PowerApps, the conditional formatting is going to work a little bit different. In this example, I've got, I've got a gallery, and what you're going to do is click on the control that you want to be a color, but you have to sort of know what other property you're referencing. So it's going to help. In InfoPath, you had the concept of naming all of your controls too. So it helps to name your controls in PowerApps. So you're going to want to go to whatever control it is that you are referencing and give it a nice name instead of like text box 1, text box 2, etc. You want to give it a name that makes sense. So then you're going to say, if blah, 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 if this text box has a selected value of in progress, for maybe a choice, then I want whatever control to be red or black or whatever the color is. So it's sort of a different way of looking at it, and you have to write it out as an if statement, as a condition. And it's not as pretty of a user interface, but it's going to be a formula that you get used to that's very commonly used in PowerApps, is that if statement. If this, and you give it a condition, then this happens, otherwise this other thing happens. So if it's a color, then if something, and then give it the name of one color, otherwise you give it the name of the other color. All right, you also have the concept of publishing that's very different with InfoPath and PowerApps. With InfoPath, you would publish your form to SharePoint. You had 0 version control of the form. You had no draft version. You didn't have a way that you could just be working on the form and have it not be something that everybody sees. If you basically, when you saved it, you could click save versus save and publish, but it was very limited. And again, you had no way of knowing like what specifically had been changed and things like that. So you also didn't have an easy concept of going from dev to prod. With PowerApps, all your PowerApps are going to have this version control, this list of versions. Now they only, as you can see in this little gray message, it's only possible to restore app versions that were created in the last 6 months. So once you go past 6 months ago in your list of versions, that little restore button is going to be grayed out. So it's just something to keep in mind, but at least in PowerApps, you mess something up, you can go back and restore yesterday's version. It works exactly the same way as versioning works on list and library items, where you just go to the version history, you click the one you want, you can click restore. And so if there's something that I broke that I need to go see how it was and fix it back, I could go restore a previous version, go get whatever that formula was that it was before, before I broke it. And then I could just go back and restore it to whatever the current version is, and then be able to fix that one little thing. So that's kind of a common thing that is easy to do. You can also make notes. So when you click to save your app and publish it, you can make version notes to kind of let everyone know, if everyone who's looking at versions, let them know a small bit of information about what you just changed or fixed. So that's a good bonus to be able to have that list of versions and be able to see the version notes for each thing. Let's see. And so that's the end of my comparisons, I think. So now I'm going to talk more about some important concepts for people that are moving from InfoPath, just things that you definitely need to learn and wrap your head around and focus on. So this PowerApps formula bar for logic, the formula bar is your new friend. You can expand it down. You can click this little format text button, which will kind of split everything out for you to make it, not just one big line of information. But in this example, this is a color. This is making something show something in a different color. Now, this formula isn't something you're just going to be able to copy and paste and put in your app, because I've got specific references to specific field names and control names in here. But what I'm doing is I'm filtering my information, my list of timesheet information, where the project value is equal to this project. So I'm looking at timesheet entries just for the project that I'm on. And then I'm getting the sum of hours. So then this logic is saying, if the sum of hours for this project is greater than whatever is in this hours planned field, then I want the color to be red. Otherwise, I want it to be green. So, and when you're working in these formulas, it will help you and prompt you along the way. Wherever you put your cursor in the formula, it kind of tells you what it expects in that part of the formula. And it also will kind of give you a heads up if you forget a parentheses. And also if you put your cursor next to a parenthesis anywhere in here, it will highlight the corresponding parentheses, so you can kind of see what's what and be able to get around in there and troubleshoot. So it's very helpful for troubleshooting. So the formula bar is your new best friend. And then for actions, remember that every single control in PowerApps has that property called onSelect. And that is what you want it to do when you click on it. So in some common things that you're going to use in onSelect are navigate, and navigate means you're going to another screen. So you say navigate and you tell it which screen you want to go to. And then submit form, of course, is if you're on a form control, submit form, you tell it which form to submit. And then new form, edit form, and you can do a refresh, which you tell it refresh and you tell it which data source, basically which SharePoint list you want to refresh, and it will refresh all the data. And then run a flow is another thing that you can do. Now, it's not that common for me. I don't create flows triggering from within a Power App very often, because now this is another really important best practice. A lot of the things you commonly do in a workflow, you can just directly do in the Power App without the need for a flow. So one of the most common things that you do, in my experience to do with a flow or with a workflow, is send an email. You can send an email directly from a Power App without the need for a flow. So there's just a connector that you add. It's the Outlook connector, Outlook for Microsoft 365. And it's got a send email function. And you can use a send email function so that, say, when a form is successfully submitted, it just sends the email from there. And there are also some other common things that you do from within workflows. There's like setting a field value is another common one. You can use a function called patch in PowerApps to set a field value. to any list at all, anywhere in SharePoint. So those are a couple of good reasons to not have to create a flow that triggers straight from your Power App. Another reason is that you can create a flow that triggers off that list, just like you've always been able to. So when something get on create or on modify, when things get created or modified in the list in SharePoint, that can be your trigger for your flow. So the trigger doesn't have to be this Power Automate trigger that kicks it off directly from the Power App. Just kind of keep that in mind, is it's not the most obvious thing. Another thing you have is color themes. You have all these different color themes. This is what they look like in InfoPath, and this is what it looks like in PowerApps, which is pretty dismal. They haven't changed those in like 4 or 5 years, so there's not really anything interesting going on there, but those are color themes you can pick from. Another interesting thing for you to know about PowerApps is the way you deal with colors. There are several different ways. So when you select a color, the following things are going to be available to you. You can define what the color is in you have several different options. You can just type a color name. And of course, typing a color name, they're kind of limited. There are not as many colors as you're going to have with some of these other methods. You can do a hex code. So if you know what your hex code is, and you have, especially for companies who have very strict, like marketing, your marketing department has a specific list of color codes for your company. That's where you could type in your color value that you need. You can also do RGBA codes. And in the RGBA formula, that very last, so you've got like, this one says 47, 41, 43, 1. That very last one that says 1, that is the transparency level. So 1 means it's completely solid, but if you put, say, a 0.5 in there, that would be sort of half clear. So if you want to make something more clear, see-through, opacity, then that's what you could change that last digit to something lower. And then you also have the ability to sort of base one color off of another. So this last formula that I show called color fade lets you, I'm saying I want a faded version of this specific RGBA color. I want to fade it by negative 0.5. And the negative is going to darken it, and the 1 and a 1 is going to brighten it to a brighter color. Okay, that is the last slide. Your next steps, if you're using InfoPath, stop creating new InfoPath forms. I know you still have a lot of them out there, but try and resist creating brand new ones from this point forward. Unless you need to share forms with external users, because I guess that's one feature that InfoPath forms had that people might use, create all your forms with PowerApps. Now, and I did a whole other Power Hour about that concept of external users too, though, because external users in your tenant technically can use PowerApps. They just have to be licensed for it. So as long as in that other person's tenant, they're licensed to be able to use PowerApps, like even like an E1 license would do that, then they can use PowerApps at their company. Then those external users will be able to use PowerApps in your company. So I did a full demo of that in the Power Hour about PowerApps with external users. So, all right, a lot of interesting conversation going on, Joelle. 15 minutes left.
Yeah,
what do you think?
Definitely.
Do you want to, how should we do this? Do you want to give me like a recap? Were there a lot of common threads, or should we just like read through them?
Might be easier to just read through them. I think it's just a mixture of things. Some people are just kind of talking about, why they might still be on InfoPath, and then there was a few other like important points. Nick mentioned the formula level error management feature. Can't speak.
Oh, okay.
What
about it? That it's there?
Just to make sure you turn it on just to make formulas easier.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks, Nick. That's a good one. Wow. Okay. They don't use it anymore.
Looking through to
do what?
Because I'm looking through too to see if I can grab any specific ones.
I have to troubleshoot and cannot remember. So Stacy, the question is, do you know why they still use it? He said, yes, there was a comment.
There was a discussion thread about, Deborah mentioned how she missed the ability in InfoPath to save forms to a form library that let me put a lot of fields on the form but not have to have them all on SharePoint. And there was some good discussion with, I think Larry and Deborah giving her some tips.
That is a good point. So there isn't really a way around. I mean, if you put your fields in a PowerApp form and didn't put them in SharePoint, the data wouldn't go anywhere when people submit the form. So in InfoPath, you're right. It was just one big giant file that all the data just became embedded in. And with PowerApps, you do have to create them all as fields.
What? But if you were printing, say if you were you know how you've done that email version of the form with the HTML and everything like that. If you were doing something like that, and that was the end result of the form, then you could just create fields and then use that, and then
just stick a text box in there.
Yeah.
If you're not submitting the data to anywhere, you're just sending it in an email or printing it. Then that's a good point. Then you don't need to use the form control. You could just stick text boxes and just different controls, just free form on there. And form control, you can also do there's a way to do a little custom card that will let you just kind of make something up. But then, it's just not getting saved anywhere if you don't create fields. But You're right. You don't have to create fields. But then they wouldn't still be in there the next time you open the form. You would just
that would be a purely one-time form that just gets printed or something, not stored in any way.
So Amanda brought up a good point. Her company is slow to adopt new things. They don't want to confuse people with something new. So that's I think that's more of a cultural thing with companies, is maybe if you have a workforce that is used to just doing the same thing and not having new things ever thrown at them, then they don't want to have to learn something new. And so that's definitely a culture that we've seen happen. Hopefully.
And somebody mentioned too, the SharePoint workflows kind of starting to crap out last year or the year before, and that kind of was a driving force for some people.
Oh yeah, SharePoint Designer workflows. They haven't officially announced that those are gonna go away, but they're starting to break a lot. They're kind of
a lot.
Sometimes I can't even open SharePoint Designer. It just crashes, or it just tries to give me an error the first time I open a workflow, and then I have to try multiple times just to get it to open.
I swear every time I've had to open InfoPath in the last few years, and my brain is just what is this? I completely forget how to function in InfoPath.
I had to look at an InfoPath form and troubleshoot something 3 or 4 months ago, and it was weird. It was very weird.
Yeah.
Try and make my PowerApps look like the InfoPath form the first time, and then I get them using it and change the layout. It's very sneaky, Stacy. I like that. If it still works, don't fix it mentality. That's another one. I guess probably a lot of companies get that. If you're on premises and you just got things running on servers and you're just going to use that same version, and I guess the biggest problem with that is going to be Microsoft not supporting it anymore, because it's just such an old technology. And so that's what you'll come across, is you have something break on your server or in InfoPath or anywhere in SharePoint, you're just stuck. They're not going to help you.
I feel that's the finance industry. They'll just sit on the same technology as long as it'll function, which is pretty funny.
Good idea, Valerie. She said we purposely didn't use InfoPath because it was slated to go away when we started using Office 365. So we have customers like that too. We also have, if you don't want to move to PowerApps, so PowerApps isn't the only thing that you can move to when you want to move your forms from on-premises to the cloud. There are SharePoint list forms, first of all. They have come a long way. So there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do just directly in the SharePoint list, and logic that you can do on forms. You have other Power Hours about that without having to get Power Apps involved. So some kind of simple things that you might have, like the whole reason that you created a form, a custom form to do some logic, some of those things you can just do in the SharePoint form. Also, there's a cool product that I like a lot called InfoWise, and we use that one with a lot of our customers. I think their website is infowisesolutions.com, and they have an on-premises version and they have a Microsoft 365 version. So that's another product that has forms, and it has the ability to do like workflows, that type of thing, actions. So again, the Power Apps isn't the only option. I just want you to move away from InfoPath. That's the goal. Let's see what else.
Yeah, I think sometimes about like all the stuff SharePoint list forms can do now, and how like back years ago when I was just like building, I was just not a consultant, was just working and building stuff, and like how I probably would have, I don't even know if I would have used InfoPath sometimes, because the amount of things that you could do with SharePoint list forms now were things I was just doing, in InfoPath, which is pretty funny.
Yeah. What is Nick saying here? Oh, okay. He said the Power Platform Product Group is building a method to transition SharePoint Designer workflows to Power Automate. Stay tuned to the roadmap and your technical update briefings if your organization receives them. Ooh, thank you for the top secret information, Nick. Appreciate that. It's good to know, because I think maybe they came to the realization that thousands, maybe millions of companies have thousands of workflows, SharePoint Designer workflows that are out there running, doing very important things, and that is not going to be something that you can just yank out from under them. So, yeah, and that's a lot of work to rethink all the logic and create flows from scratch for every single one of those, really. I mean, that's good. That's very cool. We'll have to do a Power Hour about that if that comes out.
Yeah. I feel like the transition from SharePoint Designer workflows to Power Automate is a lot easier than the one from InfoPath to PowerApps. Would you agree? Like the mindset, I guess.
The mindset of like the actions.
Yeah, because I feel like taking a SharePoint Designer workflow and making it into a flow or in Power Automate is a lot like a simpler process of doing that. Like there are some differences, but I feel like it's an easier transition than InfoPath to PowerApps, which kind of feels like the learning cliff.
Yeah,
thing.
there are definitely a lot of gotchas. I think we did a Power Hour about that, about translating your SharePoint Designer workflows.
I feel like we did, yeah.
To flow. I think we did that a couple of years ago, but yeah. What else? Yep, so Nick kind of described what I was talking about with the custom cards that don't have to push back to the data source. Anything anybody needs to see? Let me know. I'm still scrolling through this stuff. Let's see.
I don't think there was anything like specific like that. It's mostly just.
So as Nick said, turn off the formula level error management in the settings, experimental features. It's so funny. Those things stay experimental for so long sometimes. It's just like for permanently experimental. Oh, and he did a screenshot of where it is in there. So you go to experimental, formula level error management, create custom errors to improve app usability and gather valuable error information. Good to know. Yeah, Lori says she misses repeating tables and sections in InfoPath. Yeah, it is more work to create them in PowerApps. It's definitely not as simple as just plopping a repeating table control on there. And it takes at least an hour to get kind of all the pieces in place and get all the different things situated to. I'm pretty sure we did a power hour about how to do that. I know I've written blog posts about it, but yeah, it is a lot of steps and a lot of like logic that you have to be able to understand. Talk about making PowerApps faster. Is PowerApps slow? I'm not sure. I haven't seen PowerApps have problems with needing to be faster. So, I mean, there are little tweaks you can make here and there, but it kind of depends. So I think we did a power hour about this, or at least it's in my training, about the monitor. So there is an advanced, so when you're looking at PowerApps, down the left side, you have a little button that says like advanced tools. So one of them is the monitor, and that lets you run your Power App and monitor its performance and monitor what it's doing. And you can sort and filter, so you actually look at what parts of your Power App are taking the most time to load or have the most data coming in. So like, for example, if you have a drop-down a combo box that's looking up to a list that's got 1,000 things in it, just that one little control on the card is going to make the whole thing take longer to load. So if you're doing something like this is very specific, but if you have a parent-child concept and that child form has got the parent information defaulting to a combo box, but you're just writing that default parent information to the combo box, you're not even showing it, the user's not even filling it out, you can actually just empty that items property, which is the drop down that shows all the items, because no one's interacting with it. It's just got a default value in it. So the items property is what's making that thing slower. So that's the kind of thing that you'll discover when you run the monitor, is what specifically in your Power App is causing it, the slowness. What else? We got just a couple more minutes. Turn on, what? Turn on, not off. What did I say to turn on? Oh, yeah. Oh, did I say turn it off? Turn it on. Turn that setting on that he just showed in the screenshot. When it's on a SharePoint site, it's really slow. So Thomas, I don't recommend doing customized list forms at all. So that's one of several reasons why I don't like using customized list forms. Yeah, and so Stacy mentioned collections. That is one method. So you're going to have different reasons why a Power App might be slow. So there isn't just one fell swoop answer to, oh, well, you toggle the blah, 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 and then it's faster. It's always just going to be a matter of troubleshooting. And, like she said, collections could be an answer. Creating a collection for a certain list of things may be the answer to what your particular problem is. But you start with using the monitor to figure out where the problem lies and what to hone in on. And like Nick said, look at the data calls. Yep. And keep the delegation limits in mind too. All these little fun little tidbits of information, huh? All right. Well, that was jam-packed. That was a lot. Hopefully, a lot of good discussion. That was one of the better discussions that we've had in Power Hour. A lot of people have very strong opinions about this topic. So hopefully, if you have tuned in and you don't usually come to Power Hour, and this is your first time, you learned a lot of interesting information about the interface changes, the differences and concepts in moving from InfoPath to PowerApps. Also, hopefully it's been reiterated to you that InfoPath is not going to be supported anymore, and I think the year's 2026. So you really do need to get on the ball moving to something else. Also, you don't have to move to PowerApps. This was just a very specific demo of what it looks like to move from that specific product to that other specific product. But the key is to move away from InfoPath. So there are going to be different things besides PowerApps, just like I said, just a regular old SharePoint list form or other third-party products like InfoWise. But the key is that InfoPath is going away. It's very old. There's zero development on InfoPath. There's not going to be any help. So hopefully you all can take that with, maybe you need to take that information to your leadership and kind of let them know, like, pedal to the metal when it comes to getting those forms recreated in something else. And even if you're not going to the cloud, some of you might be here watching that you're using InfoPath, but you're on premises and you're not moving to the cloud. InfoWise, again, is a good product because it has an on-premises version, and it does get updates, and it is supported. It's got like a really great form editor and actions for like workflow type actions and a lot of cool little logic things that you can do. So I highly recommend it. And I think, and I did a comparison. I did a whole series a few years ago of comparisons of different form products too. That was actually somewhere on my YouTube channel. There's a playlist of all my little form product comparisons where I actually went through several different products. So haven't looked at it in a long time. I'm not sure what's even still out there with whatever products I did, but that was the concept that I was trying to reiterate, is just be sure to move away from InfoPath. So check out my InfoPath book. I'm just kidding. Don't buy it. No, we teach training. So check out iwmentor.com. And we have, click on plans at the top, and that's where you'll find our different plans. We have SharePoint training, PowerApps, Power Automate. We have very advanced, very intimate PowerApps and Power Automate training. And then for Power Hour, if you're interested in knowing when the next Power Hour is, click the little schedule button at the top of our website. And also you can sign up for newsletters when you click on the little link next to a Power Hour. That page will let you have a form to be able to fill out to request to join and to also join the newsletter. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time. Over and out. Thanks,
Bye.
Joelle.